It's our great honor to have Professor Chen today to give us a talk about political and social movement today. Let us introduce Professor Chen a little bit. Professor Chen is currently the Emeritus Professor at the School of Journalism and Communication in the SIT at Chinese University of Hong Kong, where he served as the chair professor and school director. Today, Professor Chen will deliver a talk about social and political movement in the digital age. After his section, there will be further discussion and Q&A section. So now, let's grab our chance and let's welcome Professor Chen with a round of applause.
Professor Chen and my fellow students and friends, from afar. Well, I'm very pleased to be here to talk about the theme of our book. This is, of course, you know this place. It is the Emeritus. To the right-hand side, that is the government's headquarters. And then to this side, it is the Emeritus Center. In between, of course, there's the thoroughfare, of Hong Kong, connecting the east and the west of Hong Kong Island. You can see, there are lanes of easy traffic, but now they were taken by the protesters. We'll talk more about the dynamics. The major outbreak over here has to do with the firing of tear gas. That trigger off the Occupy, so to speak, and the umbrella movement took off. And it has something to do with Occupy and the umbrella movement. The policemen formed the defense line, and then here are some protesters, activists, taking charge at the policemen. The kind of weapons they have at the time, umbrella. Also, water, bottles of water. This is a defensive weapon, because the police use pepper spray. Once our eyes were attacked or got caught by pepper spray, you need this water, to wash off the bitterness. And the interesting thing is, it is not a rainy day, but people can easily bought umbrellas in Hong Kong because there are so many 7-Elevens around, right? There are so many stores around, and you can easily access. The way they attack the police is, they rush past the police as a group, and then the police would fend them off, by using sticks and also pepper spray, and eventually when the umbrellas got broken, then they will withdraw and then consolidate and forming another attack later on. So it is like waste water, pounding the shore. So firing tear gas at the protesters, and almost instantly, the kind of occupying actions crop up in other places. It crop up in fact at the time 4 places altogether: Admiralty, and then Causeway Bay, Mong Kok, and also Tsim Sha Tsui. All these places are the business the centers of Hong Kong, and for the Tsim Sha Tsui, that subsided very early in the movement. So eventually we were left with 3: Mong Kok, Causeway Bay, and Admiralty. This is the government's headquarters, again at the Admiralty. This was taken during the night and you can see, thousands of protesters were there. They were chatting, talking, discussing, but Occupy is the idea, This is supposed to be the heart of the Hong Kong Financial Center. But then, the thoroughfare was all taken, the traffic stopped. And above here, it is flyover for pedestrians. There were, you don't see the camps yet, but 1 or 2 weeks later, you will see the tents, cropping up above the pedestrian walk. In Hong Kong, it is something as it is an outgrowth, spontaneous outgrowth of the movement. At the government's headquarters, there is a flight of steps, quite a long one, and there's a big wall there. People begin to paste the text onto the walls. In the text, you can see, they're saying something like, "You are not alone. I heart Hong Kong. I love Hong Kong." And then, I want genuine democracy. That becomes the motto, or one of the slogans, most popular slogans during the umbrella movement. Now, these are the whole wall is tagged with all these small papers and expressing the wishes of the thousands of people. This is taken in the midnight in Mong Kok area. You can see, they also had tents, the camps, but this is very different, very high ceiling. The tent is made up of, what a big piece of plastic cloth, very high up, maybe 2-story high. And during the evening, the people had nothing to do, so they did reading and then also, clicking the handheld phones. But what you can see over here, it is quite a scene to see the business area, being occupied by the neighbors, by residents, and also people from afar. Okay, so much for a visual memory of the umbrella movement. I am going to talk about some of the issues. Now, before I get into how this happened, I would talk about why this happened first. It is a way of accounting for the emergence of a movement. There are many factors, of course. We can trace to the structural factors. But instead of going too far, I would like to talk about the history, the historical trajectories, taking place in Hong Kong since the handover. Since the handover, Hong Kong has emerged to become what Francis and I call a social movement society. Now, what do you mean by social movement society? That means, a society where social movements happen very often. It has become a routine part of city life. And also, it has become a common way of achieving one's aims. That is exactly what happened to Hong Kong. And we have, take account of the number of occurrences of social protests in Hong Kong. There are hundreds, per year. And Hong Kong, what do you want? What your desire is? And law, Hong Kong is supposed to enact a law to legislate, to safeguard national security. But the terms were so intimidating, that the Hong Kong people have to express the wish of delaying or shelving Article 23 at the time, And it so happened that I foresaw that there would be a huge rally. So I conducted an on-site survey of this protesters. I already arranged, 20 interviewers before the protest and printed the questionnaires and sent out for an on-site survey. Through the on-site survey, we find out that the mobilizations was very much spontaneous or self-mobilization. That means it is not organized strictly or in a stringent way by some organization. It is there is a call for demonstrations by the Civil Human Rights Front, which is a very loose organization. It is a very loose form of coalition. But then it is mainly through self-mobilization. That means people came with their friends, family members, colleagues, classmates, and you can see that it is the first time that you witness such a huge outpour of residents onto the streets. And strangely, this demonstration becomes a tradition. On July the 1st, that is the reunification day for Hong Kong. It is a celebration of the SAR every year on July the 1st. And it is marked by a huge demonstration every year, since that July the 1st demonstration, 七一大遊行, okay, that is the beginning. And sometimes, there are, the 200,000 people, sometimes even, 300,000 people, sometimes just 20,000 people, But anyway, it becomes a routine protest for democracy and for other issues. So by the time, when you come to 2014, when the umbrella movement broke out, now what happened? The people in Hong Kong have been asking for democracy for decades. But then they keep on protesting every year, right? Every week. But then what did they get at the time? So you can see Hong Kong was denied democracy even up to 2014. Now, let's look into the Constitution of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Basic Law. By the Basic Law, Hong Kong is promised to have democracy. But since 2003, Beijing began to tighten its control for Hong Kong because Beijing found Hong Kong too threatening because of the huge turnout for the demonstration, 500,000 people. They didn't expect it. They were amazed, by how well behaved the people were. How united they become. So they begin to think differently. Unlike the first few years when Beijing stayed off from Hong Kong. So what they came up with is, we will do more in Hong Kong. 有所作為. Okay, that means we'll do more. That is the lesson they learned from the 2003 demonstration. And Beijing began to intervene more into Hong Kong, and then the National People, NPC represents National People's Congress. It denied the direct elections for the chief executive for 2007 and 2012. And then finally, NPC agreed that Hong Kong could have its directions in 2017. There has been repeated denials of democracy in Hong Kong, but then when it come to one point, no more delay, so it promised that Hong Kong could have its direct election in 2017, that is 2 years ago. But then the NPC released its framework for electoral reform in 2014, August the 31st, and the major restraint is there. The candidates for the chief executive are to be screened by an appointed nomination committee. Now that becomes the bottleneck for the Hong Kong people. You can have direct elections, but then the candidates will be restricted to those approved, by Beijing. That means, because this nomination committee was virtually appointed, by Beijing. That means, whoever becomes the candidates for the election would be someone anointed. And that is not something that the Hong Kong people can accept at the time, So they say, it is almost another denial. So people begin to think of ways to press the Beijing government in giving them genuine democracy. By genuine democracy, they're talking about not just direct elections, but also, of the freedom in choosing the candidates, and that becomes the collaboration between Beijing and Hong Kong. And that is the why the umbrella movement, the background, accounting for the occurrence of the umbrella movement. And next, I will go into an analysis of the umbrella movement from the perspective of social movement studies. Over here, one major concept is coined by a sociologist, a well-known sociologist, Manuel Castells. He coined the idea network social movement. And he is arguing that in the modern era, the network social movement emerges. Now, what is meant by that? It refers to what we are witnessing is a network of, not so much a network of organizations, but it has become a network of networks. Now, what it's saying is that, now you can see that we have all our social media, we have our personal connections, If we join a movement, we are bringing our network into that social movement. And the social movement itself, it can be a network of networks, right? Instead of in the past, you have one central organization, very powerful central organization. It becomes the center for mobilizing other people to take part in the social movement. So in the network social movement, it is leaderless, okay? And also, the growth can be viral. That means, many people can join a social movement in a very short period of time, instead of taking taking a slow pace in developing. It is spontaneous. That means, people talk to one another and get to the streets instead of, the organization sending representatives to talk to you. It is not that kind of thing. And then, how do the movement organize themselves? It is a self-government. it is not dominated by a particular central organization. And space of autonomy. What do you mean by space of autonomy? He is referring to an urban space and also a personalized space, maybe an online space, where you have a lot of autonomy. I think the umbrella movement speaks very well to this. Now, the umbrella movement, now what do the people do? They occupy the Emeritus space, right? The Mongkok space, the cross sections, or the highways. Now this is an urban space. They took that up. And then what about the online space? Because people can get online, social media, and so on. And the combination of the urban space and the online space, form a space of autonomy. That means, over there you can live your life. You can stage your claims. You can, take part in different kind of activities. And so there is a space of autonomy. And for the timeless time, the idea is that, in that kind of space, you can extend your activities from day to day. If there is no, he is also claiming that there is no programmatic demands in his case, But I think, that means, that there's not a time frame to your demands. Now, in that case, you are living in a timeless time, There's time, but it is timeless. That means you can extend your activities, almost forever. And then, reflexive, that means, it is, people in a movement keep on asking themselves, who are we? Whom do we identify with? What do we want? What our strategy should be? Now this is reflexive. Now as far as this is concerned, the umbrella movement is quite reflexive. They want the National People's Congress to retract its decision from the framework of electoral reform. More interesting, more innovative. And what's that? He thought, civil disobedience is the way out. Civil disobedience was not something known to Hong Kong people. It may be known to the Indians, okay, maybe to Americans, but not to the Hong Kong people, because people do not have this idea. And then he argued that, we should stage civil disobedience to press the Beijing to grant Hong Kong democracy. Now, if you do not grant democracy to Hong Kong, we will occupy the heart of the central district, the financial district. We will stop the traffic, and you had better give democracy to us. And we are willing, to sacrifice ourselves, for that purpose, to show our commitment, to show our devotion to the cause, Now that is one tiny column, very short, 1,000, maybe less than 1,000 words, okay? And then people, interestingly, it is like the butterfly effect. And people begin to pick it up, and then circulate it, talk about it, comment on it, and then people, interview him for more elaboration. And then it's something new to him. He did not have any idea of how to start organizing the whole thing, And then he began to ask his friends to join him, and at least he recruited 2 friends. One is another sociologist from Chinese University. He is also a colleague and friend of mine, Chen Ginman, Kinman Chen Kinman, okay. Another is a pastor, you know, for civil disobedience, you do need some people, you know, religious, you know, like Martin Luther King. So, you know, initially he got 3, you know, 2 of his friends, and then joining him, and then, you know, this idea, civil disobedience, you know, become something, you know, people begin to talk about it, and then, of course, many people take it to be crazy, you know, useless, you know. Anyway, it picked on its momentum, and they became more serious about it, began to organize the forums, and eventually they had a big organization, and then they staged the Occupy Central campaign. Okay, let peace and love occupy Central. This is the whole name, you know, for the campaign. And then when we come to framing, now why do they? Maybe I should talk about this now. When they started off, eventually to stage the Occupy, they had a press conference, and just a few days ago, you know, I talked to the initiator, one of the initiators. You know, he said, you know, in staging the press conference, they had it done in a church, and then they want to have a cross, you know, right behind the back. And then when the journalists, you know, take pictures of them, you know, he advised the journalists to take it, you know, from the bottom up. Why? Because, you know, he realized that, you know, people were accused the campaign of being violent, not peaceful, and you know, so that's why, you know, in order to counter frame that kind of saying, he used a very long title: "Let Peace and Love Occupy Central." And then he would have the conference, press conference, you know, in a church. You know. Now the idea is to counter the anti-movement campaign that is bound to come later. You know, you can see in the social movement, you know, you have to be aware of what your frame would be and how you can achieve the framing effect. Okay, so that is the Occupy Central. And the idea is really peaceful and some form of civil disobedience. They are very rigid organization. The people had the deliberations, you know, they learned from Stanford University how to have public deliberations, and then they train the participants. The participants have to register, you know, to become, and they have to undergo training sessions, how to relax when the police, you know, came to carry you away. You know, you don't want to hurt yourself. You know, in the United States, you know, if you join some affinity groups, you know, for civil disobedience, you know, probably you will know that, you know, you have to learn, you know, how to protect yourself, you know, during civil disobedience. And also they will train, you know, if you are denied access to a toilet, you know, what should you do, you know? If you want to go to the toilet, and then if you don't have water, what should you do? And then how can you connect with the outside world, you know, and so on. Now, they are well trained, and they were preparing for the civil disobedience on October the 1st. That's the national day of 2014. That is the schedule carefully planned, well organized, and peaceful, and loving, right? Okay, so, but then, so something happened on September 28th. The reason is, they had a rally in the evening of September 27th, and then it spill over into the midnight, and during the rally, what happened is, some young students like Zhou Wang of scholarism, Hoffman, CityU, the leader, they were high school students. That's amazing, really. People can't believe it. He became a Time cover figure, and then the New York Times interview Zhou Wang, his documentaries by BBC and other places, are circulating, online. Now, this guy and a bunch of high school students, they flip over the fence of the Civic Square. The Civic Square is the space outside the government's headquarters. It was blocked off. Originally, people can have access to it, but then it was blocked off at the time. And they just flip over the fence and get into the area. They say, we want to reoccupy the Civic Square, and so this incident, disrupted the original schedule of the Occupy trio, the three people, original plan, and it began to evolve into the umbrella movement. Because in the next morning, the next day, hundreds of people, thousands of people want to get to the government's headquarters to lend the support to the students, the occupiers, of this Civic Square, and to have rally there. But then the policemen, block the people from entering the place. And during that kind of situation, the people spill over onto the traffic lanes. And then they didn't have the intention of occupying the Emeritus at the time. But because, hundreds of people were moving in that direction. And, some people began to step onto the first lane, and then more people get onto the second lane, and then more and more people. Suddenly, the idea of occupy, took place. It is not according to the script of the Occupy trio. It is something very spontaneous. And then what happened to the government? The government, finding, thousands of people on the streets, already blocking the traffic, and they started to fire tear gas at the people. And that started, that drew even more people to the area. And then, the whole area was occupied by the protesters, and the confrontations between the policemen and the protesters. And since then, the thousands of occupiers occupied the place, for 79 days. It was quite a record at the time. So you can see what started out as a collective action. Because of this incidental happening, it was transformed into a connective action. Connective, that means more spontaneous, horizontal. The leader is, there are more leaders than before. In the past it was well organized, but then it becomes much less organized and much loose organization. And the two modes of action or action logic begin to mix up. Another issue that I would like to talk about is about the roles of media in the umbrella movement. By media, I'm referring to the integrated media system in Hong Kong, public monitor. As you might know, there have been important changes in Hong Kong in terms of ownership, also in cooperation terms. That means, by ownership change, that means, some, like South China Morning Post, the major English newspaper in Hong Kong, has been bought up by the head of Alibaba, right? Ma Yun. He is a communist. And also, he is the head of the Chinese conglomerate. Though of course, when the ownership is changed, there should be some systemic, implications, for media. We have yet to see how the editorial line has been changed, as a result. But we should expect, something is going to happen, or it might have already happened. And Beijing also is very powerful, very influential. It can exert its influence in co-opting the mass media. By co-opting, it means it can befriend the media, journalists. It can also give out honors and titles to media proprietors, top journalists. The Hong Kong government can do the same thing. As you can co-opt the media, there's a tendency for the media to pay back, to reciprocate. The Chinese interest can also exercise its influence, by holding, by controlling advertising money. This media would be deprived of Chinese advertising money, and that would create pressure on you. And also, the Beijing authorities, can influence or can exert pressure on media on personnel matters. If they find a chief editor, to be very critical of Beijing or none of the like, then they can harass or request the media to do something about personnel appointment. Now, all this results in what we call self-censorship in Hong Kong. By self-censorship means, the media, in order to appease the power centers, you would dilute, omit, or even distort information that is deemed professionally newsworthy. Okay? Now, you should report whatever that is important and real, right? But then, in order to appease the power centers, you want to do differently in an unprofessional way. And that is what we call self-censorship. And this is known to happen quite often in Hong Kong. And during the one crazy example, or visible example, because self-censorship is normally, hidden. You don't know. Self-censorship, right? And then no one would like to admit that you self-censor. It is not something glamorous. It is not an honor, no. Now, but during the umbrella movement, one incident that happened that makes self-censorship almost the best known case. Now they took the TVB, the largest and the most important TV station in Hong Kong. They videotaped 7 policemen arresting an activist and pulling him off to a dark corner, and then kicking and beating. And they show the video in the middle of the night. And then in the voiceover, it was mentioned that, the policemen were beating and kicking. 拳打腳踢, okay? And then this was okay until the next morning when the chief editor, our chief news controller, came back, returned to his office, and he noted that broadcast, and he ordered that the voiceover be changed. And then later on, because of the response, immense response, from his colleagues, he had an internal meeting explaining, why he ordered that voiceover be taken off. And his explanation is that, how do you know that the policemen were beating and kicking him? Now, to anyone with common sense, you can see from the video showing, even though it was relatively dark, but you can easily identify the people kicking and beating him. Okay, but then he used that kind of excuse in his censor. What is obvious, and it becomes an exemplar of self-censorship in Hong Kong since then. Why do we call it partially censor the public opinion monitor? Even though it is been self-censor in some way, but we believe that there is still freedom, at least partial freedom in Hong Kong to report what is real or what is important. And it is up to the media to choose what to report. That kind of freedom to choose still exists. And the media market is also running. The media, in order not to alienate the journalists or the audience too much, too far, that's why they do not want to self-censor, at too great a pace. They want to slow down. And the media market becomes the moderator of self-censorship. You do not want to do too much, too fast. Otherwise, you will jeopardize your credibility. And once you lose your credibility, your media would be nothing in the market. And that's why we call it partially censored public monitor. And then in this kind of system, what roles do the conventional media take up? TV and the mass media remain the most important information source for most people. Now, unlike some of you might think, it is not social media that matters most as an information source. If you conduct surveys, show it over and over, it is the conventional media. And then the conventional media are also very strong in setting the agenda for society. And it also, it can confer status on individuals. And social media, yes, sometimes you can confer status, but not so much as the mass media. By conferring status, that means you are suddenly become somebody important. If you got into it, even now, and your friends will congratulate you, for getting on the TV, right? They don't care what you talk about. They will just, you're on TV, your friends and your relatives, your parents, would say good things about you. And then the platform for public discourse, like back to Benny Tsai's idea about civil disobedience. It took 1 year for that idea to get popularized. It is something new to Hong Kong people, right? But then, during that 1 year, people talk about it in columns, in news, and our survey showed that, by the end of the day, about 70% of the people mentioned that they heard of the idea of civil disobedience. This is amazing in Hong Kong because the Hong Kong people, some of them care about public affairs, but not so much. Okay, they may know who Trump is, but in fact, when you ask them, who is this, who is the office holder of this particular branch, they may not know it. Movement situation, you need more persuasion. Especially if you want to change someone's sense, you need persuasion. The mass media is not that influential. Partly because of the umbrella movement and also in the wake of its aftermath. The recent opinion poll by Robert Chow of Hong Kong University's public opinion program is that the people of Hong Kong have lost confidence, in one country, two systems, and it was, there was quite a gap between the people who still believe in it and people who has lost hope in it. Okay, I think I better stop here. Okay. I thought it was something new from Hong Kong, and then my talk was called off immediately. So the environment is very different. The host, my host, was sitting in the front seat, and then when they introduced me because I arrived at a conference site, as somebody supposed to be important. They say, "Oh, Professor Chen, please come up and say a few things to the audience." And then I just came up and say hello, and then I mentioned what I was going to talk about the next day, and then that host over his social media, over his iPhone, not iPhone, a mobile phone, got queries and commands, from someone high up in the party hierarchy, and telling him that that this should probably stop. So after the meeting, we had talked, and then it was called the next day.
Thank you for sharing, Professor Chan. And I'm sure that you've experienced more freedom of speech in Hong Kong. And besides this, I think we should also talk about your book, The Media and Process Logics in the Digital Era, The Umbrella Movement in Hong Kong. So this is an interesting piece of work. So why did you decide to write it, and what do you hope the writers could get from this book?
This is an interesting one, with now how I got interested in social movement, and then now it is an area in which I studied. I got interested in social movement, from my earlier days. During my study in the United States, I got my undergraduate from the University of Minnesota. The very first day that I landed there, the social movements, broke out, every day. It was the anti-Vietnam War era, the people, the students stopped coming to class, and then the people were having sit-ins, out on the lawns, talking about the war and so on and so forth. So I got, as someone from Hong Kong, you can see, Hong Kong people were very well, I would say really conservative at the time, much more conservative than the young people nowadays. And of course, I'm curious about, what this is about, and I get to know the causes and the processes and so on. And then when I come back to Hong Kong, I got involved in also student movements and some social movements myself. And also when I became a journalist and paying attention to this, and as a result, it can become an area of interest to me. But then, let me jump to why the umbrella movement. Now, it is an extension of my study of July the 1st. Francis and I have also another book on July the 1st the demonstration. And the reason it has to do with my concern for the fate of Hong Kong, and also my familiarity with the dynamics of a social movement. And that's why before July the 1st happened, I can sense that there is going to be a huge rally. And it is going to be very important. And that's why I designed my questionnaire before the demonstration took place. And I also trained, interviewers, 20 interviewers, so that they can how to select random sample along the streets, and then all prepared. And because I anticipate that there will be a huge rally, but I didn't expect 500,000. I expect 300,000 people. And how many people the government sociology was expecting? Sociologists, SK Lau expected openly, 30,000. I expected 300,000. He openly. That's why it becomes, some kind of shame for him, because he made that prediction, openly. And that's why we started out that study with on-site surveys and other methods. And then it becomes, to us, it becomes an important study. But then when the umbrella movement, we did not expect it to break out in such a way. We thought that it is collective action as a original. The reason is because of the close political connection. Hong Kong is part of China. Hong Kong belongs to China. And then the Hong Kong government is appointed by China. And Hong Kong's one country, two system is by design. Yes, as they say, is the goodwill of China. Okay. Now, so China can have direct influence and indirect influence on Hong Kong. And so, when I talk about the partially censored public monitor system in Hong Kong, it is partially censored is because of the influence of mainland China. Now, Beijing, as a power center, exert its influence, through co-optation efforts, through direct ownership. So they have, huge influence over here. They can influence even the appointment of chief editors in Hong Kong newspapers. The personnel, in certain media in Hong Kong. Now, so specifically when you come to the umbrella movement, now the three frames that I just mentioned, are derived, partly, from the Beijing-controlled newspapers in Hong Kong. They are 文汇报, 大公报, okay? They are the communist-controlled newspapers. So in framing, now what did they do? They will frame it as an outgrowth of foreign interventions. This is something that the Beijing authorities like to use whenever they come to social conflicts. They want to externalize the cause. Now, in my earlier studies, we found that whenever an establishment wants to marginalize a social movement, the general way of doing it is to marginalize it and to prove that it has some ulterior motive, and in doing that, in the context of China, to externalize the cause. Now, if you internalize the cause of the social movement, the blame would be on what? The blame would be on the power holders. It will be blame on the systems. But then, if you externalize the cause, it is out of the conspiracy of the Americans, of the British people, and suddenly, it is something from outside. It is nothing to do with us. It is because someone dreamed of the plan, elsewhere. Now, what we do is to be nationalistic, so that, we should block it off, stop them from doing it. And this has to do, and also the rule of law frame, China likes it, even though, you can have doubts about the rule of law in China, but when they come to you in a different place where you have the freedom of press, then they can make use of this, and they can make use of press freedom too, in accusing the opposition. Now, so all these frames, rule of, and also public nuisance. Public nuisance is something quite common, I think. But then, the foreign intervention frame would be from Beijing in particular. The local newspapers in general, do not buy this kind of argument. And then, in the wake of the umbrella movement, you can see that this disqualification act, disqualifying the candidates who are umbrella movement related, and also, the pro-independence people. Now, this would have to do with the propaganda policy of Beijing, because to Beijing, they take independence to be the most sensitive, highly sensitive. They want to establish what they call the red line. No one should cross this red line, including university students, CUHK students, students in this university, right? That becomes very critical. In the past, the people can post whatever is on the wall of democracy, but then nothing about independence movement. This is because of China's sensitivity to ideas of that kind. Yeah.
Obviously, as you say in the initial talk, that traditional media's role has declined over the years, and social media in particular has a big impact on society. But obviously, social media helps to spread the information around, spread the news around much quicker than traditional media. But obviously, traditional media still has the role of investigation journalism to report the scandals of government. And obviously, there is a history of our traditional media, not only Hong Kong, but outside and around the world, that traditional media has been able to act as a gatekeeper to the government. So, on the flip side, social media, while there's a lot of advantage for it to spread information, etc., perhaps there's also a disadvantage of spreading fake news, sensationals, lies titles, etc. So, as an overall package, do you think the rise of social media has been beneficial to our political system, democracy, or is it actually a double-edged sword?
The question is about whether social media is a double-edged sword for political development. Probably not just in Hong Kong, but in other places. Before I answer that, I want to respond to add to my previous answer to your question about whether social media is tool of empowerment. It is related to what is that too. Now, in fact, back to the umbrella movement. At the same time, we have been talking about the role of social media for the movement participants. But you know what happened to the establishment? They pick up social media as well. Like the majority, there's a website, Hong Kong Majority, right? And then Hong Kong Speak, Hong Kong Ji Bao. Now all this, now they have become very influential. The click rate has become very high. They are funded by the establishment, by the government, and they become very influential. Now it is not just the radicals, so to speak, can make use of social media. The establishment, the conservative people can make good use of it too, and becoming very influential. So the social media by itself, it is a tool of communication. But what kind of use do you want to put it to? It depends on the social conditions. It depends on who you're talking about. Now, in that regard, I would say, maybe it makes both sides easier to consolidate the force. It does not help out. But what it does is it speeds up historical change. It can scale up things more easily. That means things may happen faster. Either way, revolution on the one side, or maintaining the establishment, the status quo. You can with the appropriate policy, you can probably reinforce even faster. Now, I would say in the case of indoctrination, ideological indoctrination, would it be easier to indoctrinate the people, to maintain the people with social media? It may happen to be so. You can mobilize the people's nationalistic sentiments much more easily with the social media, right? And then the social media does not necessarily just belong to individual citizens. It is subject to the controls of the power centers, right? And it can be for conservative purpose. So I think, maybe historical change may, one way or the other, can would speed up, would accelerate, but not necessarily in a particular direction.
So maybe we have time for one question. Yeah, coming back. So here's a follow-up question. Just now you talked about how social media rose in scaling up the whole movement. But just now you also mentioned that the characteristic of this movement is like a state of autonomy provided by the social movement. For example, most of the participants, they take pictures and upload it on social media, and it is regarded as a form of participation. But do you think that this kind of participation is just like an illusion of majority on the social media, but not really performing in the whole movement?
Okay. Interesting. Now, it has been a line of debate on whether, since it is easier or quite easy, for people to do something online, click like, and then you think that you have already done something, with a good conscience, and then you can sleep, right? And then we're playing mahjong or computer games. Well, that may happen to some people, but but I have been talking about the space of autonomy as a additional dimension in the social movement. That means, in the social movement nowadays, particularly for cultural value change, cultural changes, there's a tendency for people to get more individualized, to find a frame that can fit individual needs. Now, during the during the sunflowers movement in Taiwan, 太阳花运动, it is another, the young people's, social movement, Occupy movement in Taiwan. Now, at that time, they had a slogan, 自己國家自己救. Now, it is our country. Let us save it ourselves, okay, on your own. And then in Hong Kong, 我要真普選. Now, this is also another slogan. I want genuine democracy. The slogan is I. Now, this has to do with, this individualization of social movement activities. Now, it is easier for people to join a protest or demonstration, if the slogan or activity is individualized. You can appropriate for your own purpose, And that's why, during the social movement, people can post this, can selfie, and also, you still remember the big banner, the hanging from the Lime Rock, saying, I want the 我要真普選, okay? The same thing, okay? Now it is done by a group of climbers, and then they did that in their way. But does it rule out the fact that they do not join other activities? Probably not, okay, I would say. But it extends the space of participation. It diversifies the space of participation. So it adds a dimension to it rather than it is done to replace, the primary protest activity.
So maybe one last one.
I just want to raise a hypothetical questions. Conceptual-wise, the umbrella movement could be divided in two periods. One is the Occupy Central, and the other one is Return to the Civic Square. But most likely we encapsulated in one movement. My hypothetical question is that if the first part had not happened, that means there's no preparation work for the Occupy Central Trails to gain the support from media, from people, and would there be the second part? This is the first question. The second question is that we could see that from the first stage, the usage of media by the Occupy Trio will mainly rely on traditional media, the mainstream press, and their personal channels to coordinate with other organizations. I haven't heard a lot about their using of social media to recruit, or maybe this is not the major channel. However, for the second part, it's quite different. My second question is that, this means the breaking away of two kinds of modes of social movement. That means the traditional methodology or method will fade away. The reason that why I put it this way is was so irony that when Benny Tai announced the commencement of the Occupy Central movement, all the people in the area left. This is very interesting. It seems that those people will not belong to them, belong to their groups. But in real world, I don't think like that. How is your interpretations about these breaking away of the two stages of the movement? That means we've got the first part, will there be the second part?
Okay. Yeah, I think it is a good thought experiment. Okay, we can imagine what would happen if there is no Occupy Central campaign in the first place. Would there be an umbrella movement?
my hunch is that it won't happen. The reason is because the Occupy Central is meant to cultivate the idea of civil disobedience, to implement the plan of civil disobedience. They have already scheduled it, and they are already about to do it. So it is bound to occur. The question is, how big it will be, who will join, how the policemen will react. Okay, now it is less likely that it will be expanded. Now, as you mentioned, would other people would join it? Exactly, the young people begin to leave when Benny Tai announced the launching of the umbrella movement and Occupy movement at the time, right? And because the young people were not for it. In fact, the young people, the students, were thinking that they should not hijack the movement, and that's why they left. And only a veteran, a movement veteran, such as Chiang Mo, the long hair guy, he knelt to beg the students not to leave. But still, people keep on leaving. It is the next day, more people begin to flock to the headquarters to show the sympathy to the students, and also to anyone, protesting over there. So I tend to think that, without the first, preparing the ideology for civil disobedience, preparing the idea for Occupy, and it is unlikely that, this will happen. And even for the Occupy Trio, they plan to do it on Sundays, so that everything will clear up, by the next day, when business assume normal. Okay, the question is, if they're going to have this kind of civil disobedience, would other people join them to show their support? So many so that, and stay for so long, that they would occupy the area by default. Now, I cannot rule out that possibility, but it is less likely, given that, people, not many people are fully support of that action in the first place. They are expecting several hundred, maybe at most, 2,000 or 3,000, maybe, taking action, the civil disobedience. It will clear up by the time, when business hours were on. So there's some kind of coincidence, incidental effect. First, scholarism leaders, Zhu Xiuwang and his gang, gang up and jump into the civic square to reclaim the place, and then other people rally to the support there, and also because the police blocked the people from entering the place. That's why the participants spill over onto the thoroughfare. If they are allowed to get to the headquarters and let them have a normal demonstration, rally, probably there will not be this kind of disorderly occupy. Yeah. So history, I think for social movement, incidental dynamics, may have butterfly effects, much bigger than we thought. But maybe I should not rule out the possibility that if they have the scheduled demonstration, would the people get so sympathetic? They were so touched, they were so moved that they move on to the streets to show their support. and occupying the place by default, and then putting even much bigger pressure on the government. And yeah, there is a beautiful scenario too.